Hello. It is here's Pearl. It's a Saturday evening, but I'm not doing anything fun. Even though it's like there's two Hollow weekends this year, and I'm not doing anything at all this weekend, which is kind of nice because my parents were in town yesterday. They drove all the way from Michigan, which is like 12 hours of driving. So it's not a quick trip, but they came for 2 days and then they spent 2 days, like they spent a day driving, they stayed for 2 days, and they spent another day driving home. So I had to spend all my time with them while they were here. So that was kind of my weekend, even though it was a Friday and Thursday. So anyway, I'm trying to write today about, if you're curious, there's two chapters that I'm kind of working on. One is about like Wikipedia not being censored, which covers a lot of ground because Wikipedia not being censored is like this core tenet, and it like has to do with, I don't know, if there are things that are disturbing, like I don't know, photos of genitals or photos of like how to how to make illegal substances, like that sort of thing is kept online even if someone could potentially use it in the wrong way. But also like when crazy authoritarian governments are like when Russia's like, you can't have this article about marijuana, like Wikipedia is going to keep it up because it's not censored. So I'm writing a chapter about that, and hopefully it's fun. I'm just kind of starting it tonight. And then I'm trying to finish up this chapter about like feuds, but the thing about writing about Wikipedia feuds is that I literally feel like Robert Caro turning every page, because when there are like fights that are important and interesting enough that I feel that they're on my radar and I feel like I should write about them. Unfortunately, usually they're also extremely long, protracted, complicated, messy, and hard to make sense of. So that one's taking forever. So that's why I'm switching it up. But you didn't need to know all that. That was my really long introduction. Um, anyway, back to the Power Broker. I got Dunkin' Donuts coffee to help me write earlier today, but I didn't really get that much done. That's why I'm having a writing evening with a candle. I'm really trying to vibe out now that it's fall. Thanks. I hope it's good. I'll send it if you email me your email or something. I don't really know how public it is here, so maybe don't put it here, but if you want to read things and tell me if they're good or bad, I can send you like some of my really iffy ones, and you can tell me if anything in it is compelling, or if you're just like, yeah, this wasn't really for me. That's also fine. That's helpful. So okay. This past chapter, we were talking about how his new method of paying people off is way more, I don't know, it's just like more brazen, like he's paying off insurance companies and stuff. Okay. Then there were the smaller, we ended by talking about how Wall Street was obsessed with the bonds for Robert Moses' projects because they were just like the best because they didn't get taxed that much. And so they were like actually the best. And so people were just chomping at the bit to get a bond. Then there were the smaller morsels. There were, for example, the service fees that Triborough paid banks for authenticating and delivering the bonds, for acting as paying agents for the semi-annual interest payments, or for acting as trustee for the bonds, a job which involved studying the resolution, collecting an annual administrative fee for routine duties connected with it, collecting and cremating the coupons amassed by the paying agents, and collecting the bonds when the issue was redeemed. These fees, 4 cents per coupon for paying agents, for example, seemed small, although Moses' fees were higher than others paid for similar work. But paid out twice a year, year after year for the 40-year life of the bonds, they mounted up. Selection as a repository of Triborough deposits was similarly profitable. Moses' agreement to set aside $45 million as 5-year interest reserve was in effect an agreement to leave on deposit in banks $45 million on which the banks would not have to pay interest, but on which they could, by lending it out, collect interest. Moses' generosity to banks had to be paid for out of the pockets of motorists, of course. If bondholders received tens of millions of dollars extra in interest, drivers would have to pay tens of millions of dollars extra in tolls. The state's public authorities law supposedly keeps the cost to the public of public works as low as possible by prescribing the use of open competitive bidding on bond sales and all other details of authority operation. But Moses was not concerned with the cost to the public. His concern was to enlist in his cause the banks who could use their power to push behind the scenes political leaders as well as state legislators city councilmen, borough presidents, and mayors and governors into approving a public work that they might otherwise not have approved. Open bidding would have defeated this purpose. Banks would not push hard for a public work if they knew that after it was approved, they would have to bid against other banks for its bonds and might not get them at all. Banks would only push hard if they knew before the work was approved that they would profit from it. So Moses let them know. He inserted in the Public Authorities Law a section 561, that permitted the Triborough Authority to sell its bonds at either open sales or through private placement. And of course, he invariably selected private placement with the banks that had been working with Madigan on the issue since its earliest stages. And since the aim of the use of private placement was to place power behind his proposals, he selected as the favored banks those that had most power to place there. Chase, mighty Chase, had the most. Okay, Chase Bank. That's a name I've heard before. The Chase Manhattan Bank and the Rockefeller family that controlled it. Chase, the principal 20th century repository and instrument of the wealth and power of the 19th century Standard Oil robber baron, traditionally, as Theodore H. White notes, raised the big New York money for Republicans. William O'Dwyer, who tried to buck its power once, found out just how much it had and later commented bitterly, "There's a dictator in New York City, I'll tell you who it is. It's the Chase Manhattan Bank." Not that Chase's power was confined to city or state. During the post-war quarter century, the Chase Manhattan Bank was very probably the single most powerful financial institution on the face of the earth. And the Chase Manhattan Bank was selected by Moses as the trustee of Triborough's bonds and hence was the single largest recipient of the lucrative service fees connected with them. The Chemical Bank began wheeling and dealing behind the political scenes increasingly during the post-war era, executing an end run around the Federal Corrupt Practices Act by having various officers and directors establish and contribute heavily to a fund for good government that in its turn made heavy political contributions, notably to the Nassau GOP machine and the Bronx Democratic Organization headed by House Public Works Chairman Charles A. Buckley. The Chemical Bank was the second largest recipient of Triborough service fees. A chemical officer, asked if the bank had ever purchased Triborough bonds, replied, "We bought a ton of them." The remaining service fees and the lucrative underwriting profits and the right to purchase Triborough bonds direct from the source were divided up among the Morgan Guarantee Trust, the Marine Midland Bank, the Manufacturers Hanover Trust, and the U.S. Trust, a quartet of banks, each which possessed considerable political clout. The assets of such banks dwarfed the $200 million of which Tom Shanahan at Federation Bank and Trust was so proud. Chase's assets in 1974 were $30 billion. And so did their power. And now this power, the power of the great pool of liquid capital in the civilized world, was at the service of Robert Moses. He had a friend at Chase Manhattan, and the friend was its president. Quote, "No one will ever be able to thank you adequately for the contributions you have made to the city," David Rockefeller wrote him. Wow. He had a friend at virtually every major financial institution in New York, says one observer of the New York political scene. Whenever Moses made a proposal, and I mean over a period of years and years and years, you could invariably be sure that behind the scenes, the banks would be pushing for that proposal, pushing hard. It wasn't just bankers' grays that Robert Moses had marching behind him. It was blue collars and hard hats too. Despising working men and their organizations and desiring to drive men to hire and fire them as he pleased, to hold their economic fate at his mercy, he had naturally despised labor unions. Let her invoke whatever laws she chose. He had Francis Perkins during the 30s, no union bricklayer would ever work at Jones Beach. He had told Francis Perkins that no union bricklayer would work at Jones Beach. But during the post-war 40s, labor unions had acquired immense power in New York. Their million-plus members formed the base of the Democratic Party's popular support, and their campaign contributions not only of money from their seemingly bottomless war chests, but contributions of services such as sound trucks and campaign brochure printing, and of manpower to perform the vital doorbell ringing and election day transportation functions once performed by ward heelers, were indispensable. If the banks hid their power, the unions flaunted theirs. Thanks to a special legislative privilege granted to no other organization, there was, slapped down on the desk of every senator and assemblyman each morning, right next to the official calendar of pending bills, another marked calendar for his guidance, A calendar on which was stamped beside every bill which the organized labor had an interest. This bill, approved or disapproved by the New York State AFL-CIO. And they had it to flaunt. Okay, I have to look up AFL-CIO. I don't know what that is. New York AFL-CIO. It looks like a union. Maybe I should know what that is. What does it stand for? I'm sure it's a union, but now I'm curious. The AFL, American Federation of Labor, CIO, and Congress of Industrial Organizations. Okay, great. That's what I kind of figured it would be like, but now I know. All right, so unions are big. No Democratic candidate ran for office without intoning some version of Robert F. Wagner Jr.'s oft-repeated incantation. This is a good, fine union town, and as long as I'm mayor, I intend to keep it that way. In Moses's field of operation, the key union figures, Harry Van Arsdale and Peter J. Brennan, later President Nixon's Secretary of Labor, had substantial power to influence government. Moses's contempt for working men and the unions that represented them had not changed, but emotions such as contempt had long since been subordinated to his desire for power. Invited to lunch at Randall's Island, Van and Pete, as their host was soon calling them, and they are the key union figures, found themselves the object of all Moses's easy, flattering, gracious charm. Of his earlier hatred for all they represented, they could detect not a trace. Bob used to have a lot of fights with my predecessor, Pete Brennan says, but he got to know us and we got to know him. And Van Arsdale and Brennan liked what they got to know. Their background was in the predominantly Irish Catholic conservative building trades. Van Arsdale, who ran the city's Central Labor Council, representative of 550 different unions. That's crazy how many unions. That's so many unions. Like a construction foreman ramrodding a gang of laborers, had been a member of the electricians union at 17. Brennan had worked his way up to president of the 255,000-member Building and Construction Trades Council, and the trades' hard hats were no harder than the prejudices of the men who wore them. There, therefore, existed areas of ideological agreement with Moses that went beyond his liking for the Irish, including their feelings about Black people and Puerto Ricans and the necessity of keeping them in their place. If there was a labor force in New York with a lower percentage of non-whites than the building trades local, it was, after all, the workforce at Jones Beach. By the way, whenever it's stuff about race, if I'm saying something different, it's just because I don't really know exactly where the line it goes. I don't know how bad. I just don't want to quote things if I'm not totally sure that it's okay. So I know I say this multiple times, but I don't. If I ever say a slur, it's an accident. I just feel like this isn't the place to risk anything. Yeah. Okay. Van Arsdale and Brennan soon discovered that on Moses's contract, there would be none of the tiresome insistence on opening up the locals that eventually became a condition of employment, usually circumventable to be sure, but irritating nonetheless on city contracts. Moreover, there was another, far more fundamental identity of interest. The hunger that drove the construction workers could be satisfied only by the satisfaction of the hunger that drove Moses. Post-war pay in the construction industry was good, but construction workers are paid only when they work, and it takes a lot of construction to keep 255,000 men working. When there is no work, construction workers blame their union officials. When there's no work for too long, and it's remarkable how short a period of time an out-of-work hard hat can consider too long, they get themselves new union officials. So incumbent leaders are constantly worrying about where next year's work and the next year's and the following years is going to be coming from. Thinking as they must in terms of employment for tens of thousands of men, they think only peripherally of private construction projects. Even the erection of the largest private office building will require the labor of perhaps 100 men for a year or so. And most important, union leaders have little, if any, influence over private construction. But the construction of a large public work, a suspension bridge, or a highway, that will require workers in the hundreds for substantial periods of time. The Verrazano Narrows Bridge, just a bridge proper, aside from its access roads, employed a daily average of 1,200 men for 5 years. A total of 10,000 worked on the bridge at one time or another. And thanks to their political muscle, union leaders have vast influence over public construction. Union leaders are therefore constantly pressing for the scheduling of new public works. When employment is low, they're pressing for immediate groundbreaking for new projects. When employment is high, even when employment is full, even in fact when employment appears likely to be full for some years to come, they're pressing, having learned how long a lead time a large-scale public work requires for the scheduling, planning, and contract loading of future public works. Of one thing a public official in New York can be sure, the building trades are always pressing for public works. In 1959, they were worrying that New York might not get the World's Fair, which, with planned fair access highways, would employ tens of thousands of men. No sooner had the fair been awarded to New York than they were worrying about what would happen when, 5 years hence, the fair was over, on the very day that the full 5-year schedule of fair-connected highway construction contracts, the biggest, most lucrative schedule in the history of New York or of any other metropolis, was released. A building trades official happened to be talking about another matter to a reporter who confessed himself puzzled about his lack of glee. Jesus, the union official said, just think when this is over. What's going to take up the slack then? It was just as important to union leaders as to Moses that government accomplish, build, get things done on a big scale. The city government couldn't build on that scale. It couldn't afford it. Neither in general could the state. And those projects that the state or city did decide to build were constantly being delayed by the red tape of bureaucrats and by what the Van Arsdales and Brennans regarded as the timidity of public officials, so scared of offending voters that they listened to the nuts, the protesters, instead of pushing ahead with the laying of concrete and the erection of steel that meant progress. Only Moses and the Port Authority and the federal government possessed the financial resources to build on the desired scale. And the Van Arsdales and Brennans knew that Moses, as city construction coordinator, controlled the flow of federal funds into the city, and for almost a decade after the war, possessed enough power so that the Port Authority needed his okay on most major projects within the city. And the Van Arsdales and Brennans were impressed not only by his money, but by his will. In Robert Moses, they found a man who understood what was really important. Ask Pete Brennan what he thinks of him, and out tumbles the clearest revelation of what he meant to New York's 250,000 hard hats. Okay, this is a quote. This is a really long quote. I wish he was, so this is what the union guy is saying about Robert Moses. I wish he was 70 years younger. We need him. We need guys like him, and they're not coming along. Look at his record. It's a very good record in the building field. And the relation with our industry is very good. He always thinks big. I mean, everyone does. Nothing's done in small potatoes. Nothing's done in a small potatoes way. I mean, everything he does, nothing's done in a small potatoes way. Some people might say he's just a coarse old man, but it's just a question of getting things done. Moses always had the opposition, picketing, and people lying down in the street and all that garbage. But Moses went ahead and did it. That's the trouble with these politicians today. They worry about things like that. Sometimes people have to be tough with you. How the hell else are you going to get it done? Today they have fights over every park, every road, every playground. You say, who the hell can be against a playground for kids? But the nuts, the protesters, they're against them. Playgrounds used to be like motherhood, but today they even attack motherhood. The thing about Moses is he's a guy who gets things done. With him, things are getting done, and we're getting some benefit out of it. Benefit. On a Moses job, it wasn't just fringe. There was little or no double and triple pay overtime to be made on city, state, or federal finance projects. But Moses not only liked overtime as an institution, since to this driven man, the paying of overtime meant that his projects were being built faster. But wanting all the political help the unions could give him, he wanted to maximize their eagerness for his proposals to be approved. With plenty of money to spend and no necessity to account for how he spent it, he loaded his workers down with overtime. Man, I miss having a job with overtime. That was truly there was this period during COVID where I was a certified nurse assistant. It was kind of random, and I worked the night shift at a nursing home, and there was just so much random regulation that let you stack. It felt like you were counting coupons or something, because you could get tiny bits of extra pay in so many different ways that I just remember there were some shifts where I had totally maxed out. It would be overtime by hours, and I would get extra money if I was on the floor with the COVID people. That was from the state of Michigan. And then you could get extra money if you did third shift at night or second shift in the afternoon. And you could get extra money if you did you like picked up a shift from someone else, and even more money if you picked up a shift on a holiday, and even more money if you picked up a shift on a weekend. And it was so fun to like, I don't know. I just remember like it was kind of fun to try to max out the overtime. And it also kind of incentivized me to work like crazy for 2 weeks and then chill for 2 weeks and then just like go crazy for one pay period, and so that everything was time and a half. I mean, I don't know. Not everything, you know, but like it was so fun. Not really. It wasn't actual fun. It was like type 2 fun. Anyway, the power of Van Arsdale and Brennan and the construction unions was therefore at his command, and he used this power with his customary astuteness. He wouldn't call me on something I didn't have any influence with, Brennan says. He'd call me to exert some influence at the right spot where I could do it. And you knew he was calling other people to put influence on their right spots. A construction worker would pave over his grandmother if the job paid $3.50 an hour, Murray Kempton once wrote. The primary concern to the hard hats and their leaders was jobs, and Moses provided jobs. And in post-war New York, any public official, borough president, mayor, or governor who dared to oppose progress could be sure that it would not be long before the telephone in his office rang and the voice of the secretary on the other end said, "This is Peter Brennan of Building Trades." Whether or not, as legend had it, Peter DiNapoli had been forced to borrow a nickel for car fare during the 1930s. By the 1940s, he and his firm, Tully and DiNapoli Contractors, were making money by the carload, and so were the cartel of other huge contracting firms. Turner Construction, McKay Construction, Slattery Contracting, Thomas Crimmins Contracting, Corbetta Construction, Gull Contracting, Sicilian Asphalt Paving, Poirier and McLean, which monopolized mammoth construction projects in and around New York. The relationship between contractors and politicians was not as blatant in New York as on Long Island, where, whether or not it was true that Nassau Republican boss J. Russell Sprague, indeed, as rumor had it, had a personal financial interest in the Hendrickson Brothers Contracting Company, it was a fact that key Republican committeemen were Hendrickson employees, and that their employer threatened to fire them if they did not support Sprague. But the relationship was nonetheless crucial in the city, too. There were two organizations to which the Irishmen who ran almost all the giant city contracting firms were the major financial contributors. Cardinal Spellman's Committee for the Laity, Laity, Tom Shanahan, chairman, 1945 to 60, and the Democratic Party, Tom Shanahan, financial chairman, mayoral elections, 1945 to 53. The hard eyes of those contractors grew starry when they talked to Robert Moses. They thought of themselves as builders, and they thought of him as the greatest builder of all. One had only to sit down under the great chandelier of the great ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria at the annual dinner of the Building Trades Employers Association, a dinner at which, even in Maud 1968, it was difficult to find a single dress shirt that wasn't white or a single face. To see that to these men he was a hero, as well as to see the frame of reference that to them made him a hero. Okay, Pearl's like jumping on the couch, and sometimes she scratches it, and so I'm going to lay down a blanket so she doesn't scratch the couch. Sorry, this is so... Okay, that was very adult of me, wasn't it? To be worried about scratches on the couch. I know I don't really see very many chandeliers except for yesterday. I was walking around with my parents, and my brother really wanted to go inside the Plaza, which is the hotel in Home Alone and Eloise and probably other things, but those are the two that I think of it, that I associate with it. So we just walked inside, but it was really amazing, all the chandeliers. It was very ritzy. It was a fun thing. If you're walking down Fifth Avenue anyway, it's fun to stop in. Anyway, I forgot where I was. One had only to watch the packed ballroom, previously stirred to enthusiasm only by the rendition of the national anthem, rise, table by table, of burly, white-haired, red-faced men standing and applauding ferociously after short, squat Roger Corbetta, a bull in a black tie, introducing him as the guest of honor, said, "This great master builder, hundreds of millions of dollars have been poured into the construction business by this great dirt mover, as he likes to be called. 2 power projects, $1,300,000,000. A great man, a great builder, a man of history, serving the public for years, the Honorable Robert Moses." One had only to watch them rise, cheering again, time after time, as the guest of honor, graceful and poised and easy in his tux, his presence filling the dice, even at 79, delivered in a monotonous, hard, harsh, nasal monotone his diatribe against crackpots who opposed progress. That was really just like a magnificent paragraph, start to finish. That's what we do it for. You have a shop with, ooh, yeah. You know what? I think you should buy the chandelier. And if you have to go into credit card debt, that's probably a great use of money. I think you should do it. Unless it's affordable, then you should definitely do it. Also, I'm just kidding. Don't go into credit card debt. They admired, idolized him, and they also needed him urgently and continually. They had built up big organizations, and big organizations mean big overhead. Their towering cranes and mammoth earth-moving machines were so expensive that the purchase price was often borrowed from banks, using the equipment itself as collateral, so that in effect there was on each earth mover and crane a mortgage, on which payments had to be met every month. New York's big contracting combines needed to keep working, and they needed to keep working on big projects. Moses controlled such projects, so he controlled the contractors, and he controlled their political contributions. As for the big architects, engineers and supply companies, bonding and insurance companies, and a dozen other services used by contractors on big jobs, Edward N. Kostikyan says, "I didn't know much about Triborough. That was a pretty closely guarded operation. I didn't know that when I needed to raise money for this county organization, I could count on them. At one dinner, before I knew this, I was having trouble selling tickets, so I called a key Triborough official and asked if he could help, not hoping for too much. The next thing I knew, people were calling me because of him, saying, 'Put me down for 2 tables, or 3 or 4. These were people like contractors, architects, engineers. You suddenly realized that here was a guy who had access to the people who were used to making contributions. Fees, retainers, and commissions, the goodies of honest graft. Jobs and endorsements, campaign labor and campaign contributions of organized labor. The contributions, untraceable and untaxable, of banks and contractors. These were the prizes that the individuals in the machine coveted and that the machine itself needed. And Moses controlled those prizes. Asked the secret of Moses' success, Lehman and Wagner advisor Julius Caius Caesar Edelstein, okay, that's a crazy name. You have to have like millions of dollars if that's your name, replied, "My own theory? He was single-minded in his purpose, undeviating, merciless to those who opposed him, and he brought off everyone who might trip him up. He believed in buying, acquiring by paying the most." Moses happened to be in the philosophy of replacing graft, says machine insider Charles Rodriguez. So little understood was Moses' importance to Tammany Hall that a 364-page history of the organization published in 1967 mentioned his name only twice, and then only in passing. But he had centralized in his person and his projects most of the sources of money on which Tammany depended on for its very existence. Personally, money honest, he was interested rather in power and accomplishment. But power and accomplishment meant getting things done, and getting things done in New York meant playing ball, paying the price, the money price. He played, and he paid. He gave the machine, the greedy, voracious machine, everything it wanted. He even gave patronage, the patronage that as a young man he had called the worst form of bribery. Tammany didn't have to ask him for patronage, he offered it himself. Every spring, the word went out from the park department to the Democratic machine's district leaders. Get the names in. The names were those of ward heelers, whom the leaders wanted to reward with temporary park department summer jobs that numbered in the thousands, for which neither civil service examination nor training was necessary. Only the district leader's recommendation counted. Kostikyan, once a district leader himself, says, "Despite Moses' bullshit about politics, the summer jobs were handed right through the district clubs. We'd get application forms for him, we'd get them filled out, and we'd process through the county leader. We had some guys who had a lifetime summer job. They were 70 years old. Honest graft, endorsements, campaign contributions, even patronage. Robert Moses provided the machine with everything it wanted, and as a result, he bent the machines to his ends, mobilized its power and influence behind his plans. For 20 post-war years, almost all the city's elected officials were products of that machine, owing their election to its support and depending on that support for their re-election. Twice during that period, the mayor, O'Dwyer in 1948 and Wagner in 1960, attempted to break away from its hold on him and create his own machine. But each found that any new political organization in New York must, if it were to acquire and hold political power, depend upon the same forces as the old machine had depended on, the forces that Moses controlled. Okay, I am going to stop there. Nice. Okay, see you later. Tonight I have to try to write stuff, so hopefully tomorrow I'll read and I can tell you what I wrote. I'm going to try to, in general in life, I'm going to try to talk more about stuff I write. Otherwise, I'm scared of being like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, because sometimes I am like that. I just like sit and be like sitting there and like not actually do that much. But if I talk about what I'm doing, I think maybe it will help me. Maybe, I don't know. It's my experiment for myself. I'm trying to talk about it more. So anyway, today I'm writing about the like Wikipedia's not censored stuff and all the times that people argue about whether including certain things is censorship. Yeah. Okay, goodbye.